Good evening, everyone. I'm Father Parks. I serve here at Our Lady of Joy, and I'd like to welcome all of you, especially who don't normally worship with us. Welcome, especially those who might be from out of town. It's really great that you are here. I went to seminary where I studied to be a priest in southern Indiana. It's about 3 hours south of Indianapolis, called St. Meinrad. And while I was there, another seminarian there found out that I had a family member who had a trainer who once trained a horse that was training another horse that year at the Kentucky Derby. And he heard about that, so he invited me to attend the Kentucky Derby with his family. My immediate response was, I was thinking in my brain, no thanks. I'm an Arizona boy. I rode horses, like Boy Scout camp and once at a family reunion. But other than that, I don't really spend a lot of time around horses, and I had never watched the Kentucky Derby in my life. So I wasn't really that interested, but then just kind of thinking about it, I was like, why not? So I said, sure, I'll go. So the day arrived, and we drove from our seminary to where the Kentucky Derby was, and it was a beautiful day. It was cool, it was fresh, it was sunny, and there were men wearing seersucker suits. They looked like they were saying things like, I'm gonna bet on that horsey to win. That's what they looked like. The women wearing summer dresses and fancy hats and drinking mint juleps, and just seeing Southern people do Southern things in an equestrian environment alone was worth the price of admission. It was incredible. So at one point he says, okay, now we should go down to our seats. Now between inviting me and attending, I discovered that he and his family had been breeding and raising horses for over 100 years in Kentucky. And they had a box, which could comfortably seat about 20 people. So then he leads me to the box where I'll be sitting with his family. This is a true story. And when we get to his box, we're like 12 feet away from the rail, and right here would be the finish line. I'm sitting on the finish line of the Kentucky Derby. At one point, I looked behind me, and I could see Peyton Manning really far. I had binoculars. Peyton Manning and other celebrities were so far away from my seat. And there's about 150,000 people that attend, and if you had said, you can sit wherever you want, you might have chosen my seat. Like, that's how good it was. And so we watched the races, and it was really delightful, and there was a great finish, and I saw it all at the finish line. And I just remember the day coming to a close, and I felt so happy, I felt tired, I felt full, and so when the whole Derby was over, we were driving back to our seminary about an hour away. I was in the back seat of the car, and I was looking out the window, and I was thinking about the day, just replaying it in my mind. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad I didn't say no to this invitation. I would have had no idea what I was saying no to. Now, in the course of your life and my life, we receive hundreds, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of invitations. Some invitations big, some invitations small, and depending on what invitations we say yes to or we reject, in some ways determines the destiny of our lives. And Christmas is an invitation. It's actually the invitation of a lifetime. And the gospel we just heard, we hear Luke's account of the birth of Jesus. And it says, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole world should be enrolled. This was the first enrollment when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Now, the first thing Luke is doing, because he's an historian, is he's situating the birth of Jesus in historical realities. We know from ancient history that Caesar Augustus served from 27 BC to 14 AD. And he even tells us who the governor was. And what Luke is trying to tell you is these things actually happened in history. So I'm situating them for you. And when it says that he had an enrollment, it means that he's doing a census. And the reason why Roman emperors would do that is to get more taxes and to conscript more people in their armies. In other words, it's a Roman emperor flexing before the world. I'm the emperor. I control the known world. I control all around the Mediterranean, and I want to expand my power, and that's what he's doing. But Luke is telling us that in the midst of this emperor, this king doing this powerful thing, there's another story going on that you may not notice. And another king is going to be born in the midst of this story. And so he goes on to say, so all went to be enrolled, each to his own town. And Joseph too went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David that is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, to be enrolled with Mary, his betrothed, and was with child. And so amidst this king doing this dramatic power move, we hear about this poor couple The husband is a carpenter, and he's moving from the north down to the south to the town of Bethlehem. He's the line of David. And Jews would have known that the Christos, the anointed one they were waiting for, the king, the new king who would reconstitute the kingdom of God, that he would be a descendant of David. And then it says, when they were there, the time came for her to have her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, I don't know what image you have when you hear swaddling clothes. When I was a kid, I thought swaddling clothes were like baggy clothes. I thought, I don't know, maybe I just saw too much like Renaissance art. I thought the baby Jesus was in like a massive, very like puffy Snuggie. You know what I mean? Wow. But swaddling clothes is what you wrap babies in. It's like even mothers do this today when they don't want their children to like scratch themselves or roll over. They wrap them very tightly. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay. I didn't know that. Anyway, but there are two things that Luke points out to us. He tells us that this child is wrapped in swaddling clothes and he's placed in a manger. Why? Well, the early church fathers, when they read this, they said the wood of the manger is to remind us of the wood of the cross. And his swaddling clothes, which he's wrapped in, is to remind us that one day those will be like his burial cloths, which will wrap his body after he's died for us. In other words, Bishop Sheen said the cross of Jesus casts a shadow all the way back to the first moment of his life. That everyone is born into the world to live, but this one child was born into the world to die. Because this child came to save us. That's who this child is, and that's what kind of king he is. Now, the good news, then it goes on to say, the angels appear to the shepherds. And imagine from their perspective, they're shepherding, and the angel appears to them. And remember, biblically, when an angel appears, it's like a glorious, terrifying creature. I don't know what you think when you hear the word angel. I hope you don't think of like a little fat baby with wings that like couldn't get off the ground if it tried. But in the Bible, when an angel appears, the first thing they always say is, do not be afraid, because they're terrifyingly beautiful and powerful. So this angel appears to these shepherds and says, I announce to you good news of great joy, that is for all people, that today in the city of David, a child who's born, he says, who is Christ the Lord. And if we were ancient Jews, we would know he's the Christ. He's the descendant of David. He's going to restore God's kingdom. But he's not just a really special guy. He's also the Lord. And that word in the Old Testament primarily referred to the God of Israel, the God of creation, the God who made everything out of nothing. That's who this child is. And the messenger, though, that comes to them is a terrifying, beautiful, glorious angel. And then he says, you will see a sign. And you might think, okay, well, what's the sign going to be? And this reminds me of a story. The Pope once came to America. And when he got off the plane, there was a limo waiting for him. And he's like, oh, I was kind of like embarrassed by that. So he knocks on the window door and he tells the limo driver, can I drive? I've always wanted to. And the limo driver's like, insurance. And he's like, are you Catholic? And he let him drive. So the Pope's driving, and then finally gets on the freeway, and he's loving it. He's going 80, he's going 100, he's going 120, having a great time. Well, at one point, he looks behind him, and he sees some red and blue lights, and he's being pulled over by a state trooper. So he pulls over, and the state trooper comes up to his window, and he rolls down the window, and he's like, Your Holiness, the Pope? And he's like, yes. He's like, I'll be right back. So he goes back to his squad car, and he calls into the chief, and he says, Chief, there's this guy, he's speeding a lot, and I want to arrest him, and I want to impound his car, but I don't think I can. And he's like, well, why? He's like really important. He's like, well, who is he? He's like, I don't know. So is he a senator? He's more important than that. Is he like a dignitary? He's more important than that. Was he the president? He's more important than that. He's like, well, who could be more important than the president? He's like, I don't know, but his driver's the Pope. So like whoever that guy is must be like unbelievably important, you know? So I don't want to take his car, right? Well, an angel appears, like a glorious, beautiful being, and tells him of this birth. And he says, what's the sign? What could be the sign if you're the messenger? And this will be the sign for you. You will find an infant wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. That's the sign? Well, Christmas, the good news of Christmas is that God has come to save us. But he's done it in the most unlikely way because he's become one of us. And the Catechism says that he not only came to save us, but he wanted to reveal his gratuitous, outrageous love. And so the question for you and me is, what is our response to the invitation of Christmas? How big is our yes back to God? Because God was born in a manger. And the reason why he was born in a manger is because it was available. That's it. You know, in Mexican culture, they have what are called pastorelas, which are stories about Mary and Joseph knocking on doors, looking for room at the inn. And everyone says, keep going, keep going. And they always culminate in the birth of Jesus. And my favorite one is about this little boy, and he knows that the birth of Jesus has happened, and he wants to show up to give a gift to Mary and Jesus. But he's too poor, so he doesn't have a gift. So he's ashamed about that, and he doesn't want to show up. But finally, he gets over his shame and embarrassment. He says, I'm just going to show up, but I'll stand in the back. So he shows up in the cave where Jesus was born, and he's standing in the back, and all these kids have gathered, and they all have their gift that they want to bring to Jesus. And so Mary's about to receive gifts from the children, but she's holding the baby Jesus, and so she can't receive any of the gifts because her hands are full, and so she looks across the room for somebody who's not holding anything. And she sees that boy, and she calls him forward. And so he comes forward, and she asks, will you hold my baby so I can receive these gifts? And he said, yes, Mary. And then she hands the baby to him, and he gets to hold Jesus while she received gifts. And he didn't have a gift, but he got to receive the greatest gift. But friends, that's true for you and me right now. And the question is how big is our yes to God? Because Christmas is an invitation. And it seems blasphemous to say this, but there's a priest, his name is Father Luigi Giussani, and he says the protagonist of history is a beggar, because God is a beggar. Christ who begs for man's heart, and man who begs for the heart of God. That God, because he's so great and glorious, it seems blasphemous to say that he becomes small like a little baby. But why does he do it? And the answer is very simple. You're the reason. Because he wants to be loved back. And what could be less intimidating than a baby? Than a little baby? And the question is what kind of yes are we living back to God? The angels say, I announce to you good news of great joy for all people. Our second reading says, the glory of God has appeared, saving all. The invitation goes out to every person in this church tonight. Will you make Jesus the center of your life? Will you allow him to be the Christ and the Lord of your life? When I was a kid, we used to write notes to each other in school. And a classic note is you would say, will you be my friend? Please check a box. Yes, no, maybe. And you fold it up and you give it away. And then you would get the note back. And you would open the note and you get real excited. Do they want to be my friend? The invitation of Christmas is the Lord is saying to you, will you be my friend? Will you love me back? And so, friends, a way somebody who's been far from Christ would do this is they would make an act of faith, an act of trust in God. They would turn away from their sin, and they would make a good confession. And that's it. And somebody who's not baptized, all they would do is make an act of faith, place their trust in Jesus. They would turn away from sin, and they would get baptized. It's very simple. That's how a person would say yes to Jesus. And then they would simply make time for him every day of their life to work on this relationship. Friends, Jesus offers you the invitation to say no to. If we say no to this invitation, the invitation of a lifetime, to allow Christ to live inside of us, to become our friend, and by that means to save us. Merry Christmas, everyone.